All right, good afternoon and welcome to CIST 2413, the week 3 session, which we'll be talking about chapter 3. First thing is I do want to apologize on missing the session on Tuesday. Those that did log into it will get credit for it. I had CompTIA invited me to do the beta test for the new Linux Plus exam, and scheduling it in was a little tricky. And yesterday morning was about the only time I could do it. It's scheduled for a 4-hour period. So with the hours that our testing centers open, which is what I used here at the Walker campus and have used a number of times, and I really like it and I'd recommend it. I've gone to plenty of other testing centers and this is one of the better ones. So I did that. Actually, I had 3.5 hours to do the test in. It took me over 2.5 hours to do it. I had 113 questions. Normal tests have 70 to 80, and you normally get about an hour and a half. So I went through and did that. With the beta test, they're giving you all kinds of possible questions, and then they decide later. I'm seeing how everybody does on the beta testing, how they do on all the questions. They then decide what are the real questions, and then they go back. And that's based off of scoring, whether we got the questions right or wrong. Then they go back and determine what we made on it. So it's going to be March usually. It usually takes about 2 months before they get that done. Whenever they send me my results and tell me if I passed it or not, right at the point when they release the real exam, because at that point they know what the real exam is, and they can then go through and only count those questions and coming up with my score. I don't know if I passed it or failed it. I know I missed several questions. There was a practical question that I knew the answer to. I'd actually been doing it in my study the night before. I used TriHackMe's 3 Linux courses they have out there. You need something a little bit deeper, but I think in another TriHackMe course that I'm doing on basic networking of some type, it's not one I've assigned in the 2 classes that I put them in, that I put it in for students to do, that I think that one actually gets more to the depth of what was on the test, because there was a lot of administration type questions, but with one practical I had, and there was 3 practical questions. One of them I had, it just wouldn't take the commands like I knew I was supposed to use, because I'd actually done it the night before that, doing what it wanted me to do. So it went through with a lot of that. I'm not sure how I did, other than no, I didn't make a perfect score, but I never tried for that. I just tried to pass. And I'm not sure if I did terrible or if I did really good. I did a lot of educated guesses because a lot of things I wasn't exactly sure on, but I was pretty confident on that. I was looked at the things and I went, well, I know it's not this and this. So I knew a lot of stuff to it, but I wasn't precise on it. So I'm not sure if I went correct or not. So we'll wait and see in March, which will still be in this semester, and find out how I did. And I will let y'all know. So we're now in week 3 of the course, and that you have made it through chapter 1 and you're in chapter 2, if I'm correct. Let me double check the calendar of all the things I'm doing right now. That's not unusual. So you are in chapter 2 and you've got it for the next 2 weeks. So you'll be doing that. In chapter 2, you're dealing with DNS servers, you're configuring them, and they're going to walk you through the steps of how to set those up. Let's talk about DNS for just a couple of minutes and the whole process it uses to do what you're going to do. And that DNS is domain name service or domain name system, and it's been around since I think about 1990. When DNS came out, that was what made World Wide Web possible and the popularity of the World Wide Web / internet. Now, that was not when the internet was invented. The internet had been around since 1969. A lot of networking had occurred in the 80s, but you didn't have connections between networks. You were just networking within organizations. So you had a little bit of connection between them, but it was purely to transfer information across. So I had used the internet actually when I was in college in the late 70s to get some different information from some libraries and stuff, but you had to know the IP addresses. And then when I was there at Swainsboro Tech, I had also used DNS there, and actually I had used Unix there, which is what gave me my basis for what I did yesterday on that exam, because I ran their Unix server that ran Banner, which I installed and put there back in 1990 for about 6 years, and I knew Unix well at that point. But I haven't really used it since, because at that point in time I was teaching full-time for the college for Swainsboro Tech, and I was also the IT person. I was the only full-time computer instructor, and then I was the IT person for the college and had done all of that. And then when state decided they were going to use Banner, I developed my own program over the previous 10 years that ran the student records for the college, because I computerized to that college. So I had knowledge on that. But DNS was appearing right along after that, and we were actually using the internet for it at that point, but we were just connecting in and working off of a Unix machine connected into the state's network, and we had to know IP addresses always. So DNS appeared, and DNS is really handy. It allows you to put in words and then that work across the internet. What it does is DNS will take the domain name you put in, dwightwhite.com, and it looks it up and says, okay, www.dwightwhite.com, that domain name, dwightwhite.com, is registered for this address. I don't know what address it actually is, because I use a hosting service for it, and I can look it up and find what the address is where they host it for me in Western Canada, but I don't really need to know that. All I need to know is dwightwhite.com. Then my computer will look it up, and there's a few steps we'll talk about in just a second. It goes through, and it will find somewhere along the way what the IP address is, and then that's what it uses to communicate across the internet. The domain name goes no further than your local machine. Domain name is purely used to find the IP address, but it makes it friendly for everybody, and people that don't know anything about computers can still use the internet. So that's what you're doing, is you're going to be setting up the DNS server, which is used in that process. Because now when somebody types in the address, first thing it does is it goes and looks at the local host file and sees, does it know about that domain name? And if it does, it returns that value to your network stack, and then it proceeds to go to work. So it's got the IP address, and so now it can start sending. If it doesn't, it's going to go look on your DNS server that you have set up on your network and see what's stored there. And that's what you're doing in this chapter, is you're learning how to set up that DNS server. If it's not on that DNS server, it goes on out and looks actually into the hierarchy of them all and looks up on it to find where it is. So it's going to go out and look beyond there. So it goes out and looks at our name registry servers, and actually before it gets to looking on that, it's looked on your DNS server on the subnet or network you're on, looks to see is there a higher level one, checks it, and then it goes out onto the internet and it looks, and actually goes up to the point of there's about 7, the last I remember is there's 7 major DNS root servers, which is where the information, when you buy a domain name, the information is actually stored into, and then it's passed down. Now every time something passes it down, learns it. So for instance, it leaves the school here, having looked on our DNS server, it goes on out and actually looks on the state network and sees, does their DNS server know, and then it looks on up from your home. It would look on your computer, look to see if you've got a DNS server on your network. You probably don't. And it would go look on your ISP, and then it would go further on up. Well, at any point, if it finds out, it passes it down, and that device remembers it. So your PC remembers in its host file what the IP addresses are. Now, they do age out after a certain point of time on any of them, but that means that one person in the school here goes to my address, and nobody knew anything about it. It would go all the way up the process, find it, and then everything knows. And the next person that goes to it from the school on another machine, on another subnet, hits the DNS server, and DNS server will go, yeah, I know who Dwight White is, and sends them right to it. So it works rapidly on that. So it's going to build it continuously on that approach. So what you're doing is setting up a DNS server that's going to keep that information. You can put entries in there that are static. You can also put in dynamic entries, which is what you're normally going to use. Let it learn the addresses, learn the name, the numbers that go with the addresses, and then it keeps them a specified amount of time, and then it goes and checks them again when it needs. It removes them out of there after a certain amount of time, so that when changes occur, because domain names do change IP addresses, you change where you're hosting it at. That instead of me hosting with Rack 9, that I decide that I'm going to have my own hosting machine that I'm going to keep at my house and put it on there. And so then I would be using the address that Comcast would be giving me. So my address would actually change for that DNS name at that point. And guess what? All the machines around the world of people that access my page streaming, but it does get accessed by a number of people, would then, their machines would have to find out there's a new address for it. And so that's where sometimes you go to a page and it's not found, and you refresh, and lo and behold, it's found. The reason is when you told it to refresh, it doesn't just check if it had been in your host file. It doesn't just check your host file, but it goes up the level looking at that point, and so we'll catch that there has been a change occurred. So you're going to install DNS as a service in this chapter, which is going to be just going in and doing that. And they'll show you how to do that and to work with that. And then they'll have you set up certain zones so that you've got ways that to translate the names to IP addresses, and that you'll use that to do that. So that's what you're going to be doing in this chapter. Through here is setting up the DNS server. You'll be setting up the zones involved in it, which is going to be part of what you're going to be doing, a good bit of what you're doing. And then you'll have a working DNS, and you'll set up your types of records in there too. Your host records, which is where you tell it that this is the address for a specific domain name, are either A or quad A records. The A records are IP version 4, the quad A records should be IP version 6, yes. Making sure I still remember on it. You'll also have CNAME records or Connecticut name records. That's to take care of the fact of that you may have addresses that it needs different names referring back to it. So they've got it that you can reference it in terms of that, because for instance, that you'll have a first name that points to the server, obviously varies according to the servers. Well, you want it to point back to the correct machine that it's all done at, rather, even if there's multiple places. So they're going to take you through those and teach you that, and that's what we'll work on. Next week, I fully intend for us to be live, and then y'all can ask some questions and I can answer. The other part is y'all can email me at any point, and I'll be glad to answer your questions of if you hit any problems. But I hope y'all all have a good week. We should have the session as scheduled next Tuesday morning, and get the session done fine. Thank you.